Welcome back to the Wild West, where the dust carries whispers of blood and betrayal. Clay Allison, scarred by war and a fractured mind, rode west to Texas, his soul a crucible of fire and loyalty. On the Red River's muddy banks, a ferryman's greed met his fist, maybe his blade, birthing a legend in blood under a crimson dusk. In New Mexico's Cimarron, where saloons reek of whiskey and death, Allison's path darkened. The Colfax County War loomed, a storm of greed and lead, as the Santa Fe Ring sought to tear settlers from their land. When Reverend Toby's body was found, shot twice in the canyon's shadow, Allison turned, his pistol a judge against corruption. But treachery runs deep. Governor Axtell's lies weave a trap to break him. A telegram as false as a snake's smile. Will Allison's defiance outwit the ring's deceit? Or will his fire burn Cimarron to ash? Ride with us through the chaos, where trust is a ghost and blood writes the truth. If you're new, subscribe and join the trail. Let's step into the storm. The Texas sun burned like a judgment, its light searing the plains where Clay Allison led his kin, a caravan of dust and dreams fleeing Tennessee as ashes. The year was 1866, and the Red River lay before them, a muddy serpent coiling through the land, its banks churned by hooves and greed. Zachary Colbert, the ferryman, stood at its edge, his eyes glinting like tarnished coins, his voice thick with a demand for more than the agreed fare. Clay, his hazel eyes narrowing, felt the old wound in his skull pulse, a storm stirring in his blood. "You cheat a man who's crossed half a nation?" he growled, his words sharp as a spur's rowel. Colbert sneered, unyielding, and the air crackled with betrayal, a contract broken before the river's flow. What followed was a tempest, fists like hammers, the water swallowing their struggle, its surface rippling red. Some swore Clay beat Colbert to the brink, the man crawling free only by the river's mercy, his breath ragged as he fled. Others whispered of a duel, hands bound with rope, knives flashing under a blood-red dusk, Colbert's body left to the current. The truth was a shadow, slipping through the cracks of tales told in saloons, but the act was a spark, kindling the legend of a man who answered deceit with wrath. On the Brazos River, 80 miles west of Fort Worth, Clay settled, the land vast and unforgiving, its grasses whispering of freedom and peril. He took to herding cattle, his hands calloused, his frame lean under the weight of a life unmoored. The plains stretched endless, their horizons broken only by the silhouettes of longhorns and the dust of their passing. Some said he rode with Charles Goodnight, driving 2,000 head to Fort Sumner under a sky pierced by stars, the trail a ribbon of hardship etched in hoof prints and sweat. No paper bore his name, no cowpoke spoke it in the firelight, but the tales grew, weaving Clay into the myth of the Goodnight loving trail. He worked for M.L. Dalton, trailing cattle across the panhandle, his skill sure, his temper a coiled snake. To the Matthews family, orphans of a Confederate comrade, he was a shield, his loyalty fierce as a winter gale, bringing them provisions, his shadow a promise of protection in a land where trust was a fool's wager. Yet violence clung to him like burrs. In Cimarron, New Mexico, where he moved with his brother-in-law Lewis Coleman, the air was thick with the scent of sage and whiskey. The town was a crucible, its saloons pulsing with the heartbeat of men who lived by the gun. There, in a fool's jest, Clay and his companions stampeded a herd of army mules, their hooves thundering through the night, a rebellion against the bluecoats who'd once caged him. Laughter turned to chaos, his pistol barking, and a bullet found his own foot, the instep torn, blood pooling in the dust. He hobbled, a crutch under his arm, his face gaunt in photographs, one alone, another flanked by the Matthews boys, their eyes wide with awe for a man who danced with death. The wound was a mark, like the crack in his skull, a reminder that his recklessness was both curse and creed. In Elizabethtown, October 1870, the seeds of violence bore fruit. A woman burst into a saloon, her cries cutting through the haze of liquor. claiming her husband, Charles Kennedy, had slain their child and travelers, their bones hidden beneath his cabin. Clay, whiskey in his veins, his mind a storm, rode with Davy Crockett, not the Alamo's hero, but a kin in spirit, to the cabin. They found Kennedy, drunken and swaying, his eyes hollow as a grave. Dragged to town, he was locked in a cell, but the court of Cimarron was no hall of law. The mob, led by Clay, yanked him from his chains, a noose finding his neck, his body swinging from a slaughterhouse rafter. Whispers told of Clay severing Kennedy's head, setting it on a pack above a saloon yet unbuilt, a warning to beasts who wore men's faces. The truth was murky, the act unproven, but the story clung, a testament to a man whose justice was as swift as it was brutal. Betrayal shadowed him still. In Cimarron, the Santa Fe Ring's greed loomed, their eyes on the Maxwell land grant, a swath of earth claimed by settlers who'd tilled it since before the ink of 1841. Clay, now a rancher south of Maxwell, walked a line between order and chaos, his heart torn between the settlers' cause and the Ring's promises. The murder of Reverend Tolby would shift that balance, but in these years his name grew, a whisper in the wind, a man who answered deceit with lead. "No man owns me," he'd mutter, his voice a low growl, his hand never far from his pistol, as if betrayal waited in every shadow. The land itself seemed to conspire, its promises broken by men who swore oaths only to spit on them. Clay Allison, scarred and unyielding, carved his path through Texas and New Mexico, his legend of fire fed by conflict, its flames licking at the edges of a war yet to come.
In Cimarron, where the night was a shroud of dust and menace, the Colfax County War burned like a fever in the land's bones. The Santa Fe Ring, their greed a stain on the earth, tightened their grip, their eyes fixed on the settlers who clung to their homes like roots to stone. Clay Allison, his mind scarred by an old wound, stood as a blade against their schemes, his hazel eyes burning with a fire no man could tame. The murder of Reverend Tolby had turned him, his heart sworn to the settlers, his pistol a judge where law was bought and sold. But the Ring, led by men like Thomas Catron and Stephen Elkins, wove a darker plot, their hands hidden in the shadows of power. Governor Samuel Axtell, a puppet strung by their gold, crafted a trap to break Allison, his deceit a venom dripping through the veins of New Mexico. The telegram came like a false dawn, its words sweet as honey, promising Axtell's arrival in Cimarron to parley with the settlers. He seeks peace, it claimed, the ink a lie, scrawled on paper thin as trust. Allison, standing in the St. James Hotel, its air thick with whiskey and blood, read the message, his lips curling like a wolf's. "Axtell thinks to snare me," he muttered, his voice a low growl, his hand grazing the revolver at his hip. "He'll find no prey here." The wind howled outside, carrying whispers of betrayal, and the settlers, their hearts heavy with Tolby's death, sensed the trap. William Motley, editor of the Cimarron News and Press, learned of another letter, Axtell's true intent laid bare, a ruse to lure Allison and his allies to a single spot where soldiers from Fort Union waited, their rifles gleaming with the Ring's will. "Kill all who resist," Axtell wrote, his words veiled but sharp, urging extreme measures. The settlers' blood ran cold, their trust in governance shattered, and Allison, his shadow long in the lamplight, vowed to meet deceit with defiance. On January 19, 1876, Allison struck, his rage a storm breaking over Cimarron. With a mob at his back, he descended on the News and Press, its printing press a mouthpiece for the Ring's lies. The night was a void, the stars hidden, and the air crackled with the scent of powder. Dynamite roared, the press torn from its foundation, its wreckage flung into the Cimarron River, the water swallowing it like a grave. Allison, his face gaunt, his eyes alight with a fractured fire, scrawled his name in red ink on the blank pages of the latest edition, selling them at dawn as a taunt to his foes. Agnes Motley Cleveland, daughter of the editor, faced him, her golden hair loose, her voice sharp with scorn. "You ought to be ashamed," she said, her hands wringing in the wreckage. Allison, tall and leathery, his forehead pale above a sweatband line, met her gaze, his eyes steady but not vicious. "Go buy another press," he stammered, thrusting a roll of greenbacks into her hand, his voice soft with an embarrassment rare as rain. "I don't fight women." The act was a blade in the ring's heart, but the war raged on, its flames fed by blood and betrayal. Fort Union soldiers came for Allison days later, their boots heavy on the frozen earth, their orders to take him dead or alive. He stood at his ranch, the horizon a line of fire, and surrendered without a shot, his defiance not in resistance, but in his unyielding gaze. They held him hours, the adobe walls of Cimarron's jail cold as a tomb, but no charge stuck. Captain Francis Moore, his pen steady, wrote of a man of property, not an outlaw, and Allison walked free, his name a whisper on the wind, a specter the ring could not bind. The settlers cheered, their hearts lifted, but the land groaned, its peace a lie. Davy Crockett, Allison's kin and spirit, not the Alamo's hero, brought fresh blood to Cimarron streets. In Lambert's saloon, where the floorboards drank the blood of 6 men in 9 months, he gunned down 3 Buffalo soldiers, their deaths a spark from a drunken quarrel, his bullets indiscriminate. The town reeled, its name black in papers as far as Cincinnati, calling it a den of cannibals. Crockett's trial was a mockery, his plea of drunkenness a shield, his punishment a $50 fine for a pistol carried in city limits. Emboldened, he and his band ran roughshod, their horses thundering into saloons, their guns barking at the sky. They held Sheriff Isaiah Reinhardt at gunpoint, forcing whiskey down his throat till he blacked out, a humiliation that broke the town's patience. On September 30th, 1876, Reinhardt and his deputies cornered Crockett, his laughter a taunt, daring them to shoot. They obliged, his body crumpling to the earth, laid beside the soldiers he'd slain. The settlers, weary of blood, formed a citizens' committee, McMains at its head, Allison a member but no leader, his heart too wild for titles. They condemned Fort Union's protection of Judge Longwell, demanded Tolby's killers face justice, and swore they were no mob, but their words rang hollow against the bodies piling in Cimarron's dust. The territorial legislature, fearing the chaos, stripped Colfax County of its courts, sending cases to Taos, a 50-mile trek that mocked justice. 7 indictments fell on Allison, murder, mayhem, but witnesses vanished, truth slipped like sand, and Allison walked free, his legend a fire unquenched. In June 1876, he shared a stagecoach with Axtell from Vermejo to Trinidad, 50 miles of dust and tension. Some said it was planned, a parley to clear his name. Others swore Allison ambushed the governor, his presence a blade at Axtell's throat. The truth was a shadow, but Allison's gaze, sharp as flint, left Axtell squirming, a politician caught in his own lies. The war waned, its flames doused by Mary McPherson and Frank Angell, who toppled Axtell's rule, their pens sharper than Allison's gun. The ring's grip loosened, the settlers held their land, but Cimarron's scars remained, its streets stained with the blood of Tolby, Vega, Grego, Cardenas. Allison, his soul a crucible of loyalty and wrath, left New Mexico, his silhouette fading into the horizon, a man too wild for any one land to hold. He rode toward Dodge City, where tales of Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday waited, his name a whisper in the wind, half hero, half demon, eternal in the earth's memory. The Colfax County War was a wound that closed but never healed, its betrayal a lesson carved in stone. Trust no man who trades justice for gold.
Allison, scarred and unyielding, carried his fire onward, his legend a flame that burned beyond the dusk, a specter of defiance in a land of deceit.